So, welcome to the end of year episode for Masters of TESOL. This is just a collection of funny stuff or weird stuff from the classroom. So, thank you to everybody who sent in their stories. I wasn't sure who wanted their names known or not, so I've just used first names to protect anonymity. You'll find those in the show notes. But it was great. We had stories sent in from America, China, Belgium, all over the world, but I'm sure the experiences are pretty common. So let's start off with my story. So I work in a pretty hot country, but for some reason a lot of the students don't like having the air conditioner on too strongly. They think it's going to make them ill, or they think that the filters haven't been cleaned, so it's still really dusty. So quite often I find myself stood in an absolutely scalding hot room. So at the end of one class, or 1 hour of one class, I felt like I was starting to sweat through my clothes. So I went back up to my office and I thought, right, I'll just stick some tissues in my armpits for now, and, that should soak up some of the worst of it. So I went down and I taught the rest of the last hour, and I could see the students were kind of looking at me in a bit of a strange way, but I was trying to power through it. And then I got back up to my office after the first hour, and I realised that just on my left arm, a tissue had slipped down and had been flapping out for who knows how long. But nobody thought to tell me that there was a soggy tissue sticking out of my shirt. So let's get into the submitted stories. And for the first one, you should probably look up the French for rooster first.
So I used to teach this guy that we had a nickname, that his nickname was Holy Joe. He was very religiously conservative, and he refused to call my boyfriend because I lived with him. He insisted on calling him my husband. But anyway, one morning I was going to his office and I just arrived, and he had obviously been thinking about how to phrase something to me, because as soon as I sat down, he turned to me and said, "I love to eat cock."
I fell out a door of a class once. I was leaning against the door and I didn't realise it was open, and it opened out the way, so I actually disappeared.
Hi, this is Matthew Noble in Tacoma, Washington. I would tell a quick story about my own CELTA experience in 2005. So I had 9 TPs, I believe, and I think the majority of those TPs, maybe 6 or 7 of them, ended up with me drawing a sketch of something on the whiteboard, because I liked to do that. But somehow way too many of my sketches had a more than vaguely phallic quality. It was bizarre, even when I became conscious of it. It was hard to avoid becoming conscious of it, because my peers on the course, my course mates, really loved to make sure I knew exactly how funny it was and how the next one was coming. And somehow it did. Anyway, I remember something like an iceberg somehow working in that direction, a guitar, but the one that's really seared into my memory and will forever be is a quick, very, very fast sketch of a puppy. Just the head of a puppy, ears and a snout. And I think at that point I decided, when that final straw was plucked, that it may have taken me a year or so to really be confident around a whiteboard. I think I did a lot of printing out and sticking onto the board with magnets images that were not by my own hand.
So I was doing a picture description task. It was a cartoon strip of a woman was shopping, and she goes back to the car and she puts the kids in the car, and she's putting the shopping in the back of the car, and a man came up to her, tried to snatch her bag. So she reached into the car and she got a bottle of wine out of her bag and she cracked him over the head with it, and then the police came. And while the student was describing it, she put the shopping to the car, and suddenly a strange man came up her behind.
So I was teaching this guy from Belgium, and in Belgium you have French and Flemish, and the English word or in Flemish is of, and they often get confused with this. So I was teaching a guy, he went to Amsterdam for the weekend, and I said, Amsterdam, that's nice. What kind of things can you do in Amsterdam? And he said, you can do many things. You can visit a museum, you can walk along the canal, you can... And I said, or. And he said, yes, or you can get an or also.
Many people have claimed this story to be their own, but this truly happened to me when I was teaching in Seoul. I had a student, and I asked him, what are you doing tonight? It was 9 p.m., last class of the day. I didn't assume much. So he said, I'm going to go home and play sex phone. So I thought, oh, he must be talking about phone sex. He was going to have phone sex. Who am I to judge? I said, great, good for you. I said, where do you like to do sex phone? He says, at home. I said, oh, okay. Do you need some privacy when you do it? And he said, well, I need a quiet room. I thought, oh, all right. You know what? That's your thing, no problem. And then quickly, I realized that he meant that he likes to play the saxophone.
In 2008, my English colleague and I were teaching at a local university in Kashgar, Xinjiang, China. Some of the students were all very interested in English language. One evening, we were having rice and chicken for the dinner at the university cafeteria. Since my colleague was the only foreigner, he was attracting quite a bit of attention from the students, who were just too eager to practice what they learned in the classroom with the native speaker. And the students started to ask present simple questions such as, what is your name? Where are you from? And do you like this? And do you like that? Then one of them pointed at his dinner plate and said, do you like chicken food? My colleague's face went blank and he replied no. However, the student continued to ask the same question a bit louder for the second time, pointing his finger closer to the chicken in his plate. The colleague realized the confusion and noted that was the chicken's leg he was talking about. Later he explained that he has never tried chicken's foot, but he likes chicken's leg.
Once I entered the class, and it was very surprising because one of the students all of a sudden came up to me and kissed my hand. And what's happened? They were having a bet. Are you gonna propose to me? Just like, where's the ring?
Here's a good one from a couple weeks ago. I was walking around the classroom and I looked down at my student's paper and it was completely blank. So I asked him, why is your paper completely blank? And he goes, Jesus! At the top of his lungs. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting response. And then another kid in the class goes, Sensei, who is Jesus? So I walk over to him and tell him, well, you have a phone, don't you? He's like, yeah. I was like, so go ahead, look it up. A few minutes go by and I go back to the kid. I say, so, have you found Jesus yet? As I quietly chuckle to myself. Got to keep ourselves entertained in this business.
I'm bald. And one time I was in the teacher's room, and one of my coworkers came up to me. He said, Roger, do you know any lyrics from the musical Hair? And I said, not off the top of my head.
It was my first time doing in-service teacher training. And it had been really built up to me like, okay, these are public school, high school teachers. They're going to notice everything you do. They're going to be hypercritical of the class. And like, I was especially aware of this because I'm, fairly fresh off an MA. Okay. I'd been talking to my office mate before this, and he'd been doing the in-service program for a number of years. And he had just gotten done that morning telling me about the time in his first week when he ended class an hour early. And so I was laughing. We were laughing about this. We thought it was a really funny story. And so I go and I had 2 classes back-to-back of these high school teachers. And I get through the first one, 2 hours, fine, no problem. Get through the second one, get back up to my office. I'm like, just talking to my office man. I'm like, man, I am so relieved. Like, I got through that first day. I survived. Everything's fine. We've been talking for about 10 minutes, and he's like, wait a second. What time does your class end? I was like, I think it ends at 5. And he's like, it's 4:10 right now. I was like, what? No way. It cannot be. This cannot happen. Like, this is impossible. Like, I was like, oh my God, I just walked out an hour early. What do I do? I was like, do I go back down there? And he's like, no, don't open the door. Just stay here. Don't do anything. I was like, well, what if they're still there? What if they're like waiting for me to come back? And he's like, no, they're not. They're not. Just let them go. Nobody cares that you let them go an hour. And I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be fired. Like, they're never gonna let me teach in service again. Like, I went back the next day and I didn't even give them the chance to mention that. I was like, so yesterday, funny story, and I rehashed the whole thing, and they thought it was hilarious, and they were like, no, we weren't going to say anything. You let us go early. Like, we get out of class an hour early. They're just like high schoolers too. They don't mind. So, no. But yeah, I couldn't believe that had happened.
I was teaching at a public school. We were each responsible for a couple of years, and I was responsible for the 7th year students. And our curriculum was based around English magazines that were published and kind of distributed. And I know one month we got the magazine, and I noticed in the middle of the book, right where the staples are, and this was just a Fanta ad with a bunch of cheerleader-type girls, short mini skirts, jumping and real cheerful, very colorful, really distinct. So really easy to spot when a student is focusing on this page because it's not like anything else in the course book. So that month, I made a rule. The first day of class, I said, everybody open up to page 18, 19, or whatever the numbers were. Say, get a look at this ad. Look at this. This is amazing. You got Fanta if you want to go buy Fanta. All right, we're done. I don't want to see this page ever again for the month. You had your time. It was a garbage page, just some filler. So I made a rule, if I see this page, I'm going to rip it out. You don't get this page in your book anymore. They aren't missing any content. They're only missing this sexy Fanta ad. And that was fine with them. And in the first week, I had a couple of victims, and I'd go around and rip it up. I pasted it on the back wall and said, if you want to visit your page, it's here. It's not gone forever. No one was really upset when it happened. They all knew, okay, I'm looking at an ad. So we got through the month. First week, a lot of victims. Second week, it was pretty much taken care of. Those who were going to do it didn't have the pages anymore. And the last week we get there, and I see a girl looking at her book, and she's got the page open. She's like, sorry, I thought we were done with this, but I ripped it out, and she just broke out into tears. She could not be more upset. It was such a shock to me. Her eyes got real big, and she was very worried. And I just stopped, I'm sorry, this was the rule, and I thought it was, not a big deal. And afterwards, I'd always have a couple of students stick back and just kind of chat with me, and I had to ask them, what's up with her? I took out the page, and she started crying, and they all said, well, that wasn't her book. She borrowed it from a boy she really liked. And because she had a crush on him, she was so upset about this idea of giving him a book missing the page. Real weird.
Okay, so that's enough for this year and for this show. So if these stories have kind of sparked any memories for you, then feel free to send them along to mastersoftesol@gmail.com, and I'll use them in an upcoming show. On that note, I'll see you next year for some more interviews. Cheers.
I can't stop it. How do you stop it?